she came smiling, but they had already replaced her. The first sign that something was wrong should have been Daniel's voice that afternoon. It was too calm, too measured, the kind of calm a person uses when they are trying very hard to sound normal. Amelia Brooks stood in front of the bedroom mirror, one hand smoothing the soft fabric over her 7-month pregnant stomach, the other holding her phone between her ear and shoulder. The late October light poured through the tall window of their townhouse in Crestwood, painting everything in a warm gold that almost made the room feel peaceful. Just my parents, Daniel had said. Super casual. Don't make a big thing of it. Amelia smiled to herself as she adjusted the sleeve of her dress. It was deep forest green, simple but elegant, the kind of dress that made her feel like herself again after months of swollen ankles, restless nights, and the strange quiet fear that sometimes came with carrying a child into an uncertain world. Your mother doesn't do casual, she said softly. Daniel gave a short laugh. I know, but tonight is different. Different. That word settled strangely in her chest, but she ignored it. For the past 4 years, she had learned how to ignore many things. She had ignored the way Daniel had become distant during the last year. She had ignored the late nights explained away by client dinners and strategy meetings. She had ignored the tension in his jaw whenever she talked about baby names, or nursery paint, or whether he thought their daughter would have his eyes. And lately she had ignored the worst thing of all, that feeling, that quiet, humiliating feeling that love had started slipping out of the room while she was still trying to hold it together. But that evening, standing in the warm bedroom light, Amelia made herself believe this dinner might be a reset. Maybe Daniel's mother had finally softened. Maybe the baby had changed something. Maybe family for once would feel like family. I'll be there by 6:30, she said. Drive safe. He hung up first. Amelia looked at her reflection again. Her face was a little fuller now. Her eyes looked more tired than they had a year ago. But there was still something gentle in them, something hopeful, and she hated herself a little for still having it. On the dresser sat a small gift bag with a ribbon around the handle. Inside was a candle she had bought for her mother-in-law, Eleanor Brooks, because Eleanor always appreciated expensive, tasteful things, and Amelia, even now, still wanted to arrive with grace. That was the thing about Amelia. Even when people made her feel small, she still came with both hands full. The drive to the Brooks family estate took 38 minutes without traffic. Amelia knew, because she had done it enough times to stop relying on the navigation app. Crestwood gave way to older roads lined with heavy trees, then to the part of town where homes stopped looking, lived in, and started looking curated. The Brooks house sat behind white stone pillars and iron gates, lit from within like some polished version of family life. Amelia parked, sat for a moment with both hands on the steering wheel, and took a slow breath. Their daughter shifted inside her. I know, Amelia whispered, resting a hand on her belly. Me too. She picked up the gift bag, checked her reflection in the mirror one last time, and walked to the front door. Before she could ring the bell, the door opened. Eleanor stood there in a cream silk blouse and a perfect expression that never quite reached warmth. Amelia, she said, glancing briefly at her dress, her stomach, the gift bag. You made it. Amelia leaned in for the kind of careful half embrace Eleanor preferred. Of course. I hope I'm not late. No, Eleanor replied. Come in. The house smelled like rosemary, polished wood, and something roasting. Amelia stepped inside and immediately heard voices. More voices than she expected. Not two people, not four, a roomful. Her hand tightened around the gift bag. She followed Eleanor toward the dining room, heels soft against the marble floor, the low murmur of conversation growing clearer with each step. Laughter rose from inside. Glasses clinked. Someone said something that made 3 people laugh at once. Amelia slowed at the doorway. There were 11 people in the dining room. Daniel's parents, his sister and her husband, two cousins, an elderly aunt, Daniel's uncle, a neighbor Eleanor adored for reasons no one understood, and at the long dining table, in the chair Amelia had sat in for every holiday and Sunday dinner for the last 4 years, sat another woman. She was beautiful in the expensive, polished way some women seem to be by design. Honey blonde hair in loose waves, soft beige sweater, delicate gold earrings, comfortable hands folded beside Amelia's place setting as if they belonged there. The room didn't go silent immediately. That was the cruelest part. Conversation only thinned, then slowed, then stopped. And in that slow, horrible unraveling, Amelia felt something cold move through her body. The woman at her seat looked up, not embarrassed, not startled, just still. Daniel was standing near the sideboard with a glass in his hand. He turned when he heard Amelia enter. For 1 second, their eyes met, and Amelia understood everything, not every detail, not every timeline, but enough to know this was not a surprise to him, enough to know he had expected this moment and let it happen anyway. The gift bag nearly slipped from her fingers. No one spoke, no one moved. It was Eleanor who finally broke the silence. Amelia, she said in that same controlled voice, we had to make a few adjustments tonight. There's a seat for you in the breakfast room. It's quieter there, more comfortable in your condition. Amelia stared at her. The words floated in the air for a second, absurd and unreal before their meaning landed. The breakfast room, not the table, not with the family, separate, contained, hidden. She turned her head slowly toward Daniel. He set his glass down, but did not come toward her. Daniel? She said. His mouth parted, but nothing came out. That was answer enough. Amelia looked back at the woman in her seat. The woman lowered her eyes then, just briefly, as if shame had arrived too late to matter. Who is she? Amelia asked, though part of her already knew. Daniel exhaled through his nose, glanced at his mother as if looking for permission, and Amelia felt something inside her crack. Her name is Vanessa. Vanessa, not a client, not a colleague, not a misunderstanding. A woman with a name and a seat at her table. Amelia's voice remained quiet, which later many people would remember as the thing that unsettled them most. And she's here because? Daniel swallowed. This isn't the time. A faint, humorless smile touched Amelia's mouth. No, she said. I think this is exactly the time. Eleanor stepped forward slightly. Amelia, please. We're not doing this in front of everyone. Amelia looked around the room, at faces she had bought gifts for, cooked for, smiled for, remembered birthdays for. Faces now turned carefully blank to avoid the burden of choosing a side. You already did this in front of everyone, she said. Daniel finally moved toward her. Can we talk privately? Were you planning to tell me privately that another woman was sitting in my chair? Amelia asked. His face tightened. Lower your voice. That almost made her laugh. For 4 years, Amelia had lowered everything. Her voice, her expectations, her hurt, her standards, her instincts. She had made herself pleasant enough, patient enough, forgiving enough, hoping one day the effort would come back as love, and now he was asking for quiet. Eleanor drew in a breath, already irritated that Amelia was not collapsing neatly. You're upsetting yourself, she said. This is not good for the baby. Amelia looked at her and, for the first time in all the years she had known her, did not try to soften what she felt. No, she said, what's not good for the baby is being invited to dinner by a husband who has already replaced her mother. The room went still again. Daniel's uncle looked at the floor. His sister folded her napkin in her lap. Someone at the far end of the table shifted uncomfortably, but still said nothing. Vanessa rose slowly from the chair. I should go, she said quietly. Eleanor's head snapped toward her. Sit down. The authority in her voice was immediate and chilling. Vanessa froze, and in that instant, Amelia saw it clearly. This was bigger than Daniel's affair. This had roots, permission, structure, the whole ugly architecture of a family that had decided long before tonight who mattered and who could be humiliated without consequence. She set the gift bag down on a side table with careful hands. The candle inside thudded softly against the wood. Daniel reached for her elbow. Amelia, stop. She pulled her arm away. Did you tell her about our daughter? She asked. His silence lasted too long. Amelia's face changed. Not because she cried, she didn't. It changed because hope left it. You didn't, she whispered. Vanessa stood very still beside the chair, her face draining of color. What? She said, looking from Amelia to Daniel. Amelia turned toward her now, seeing her properly for the first time, not just as the other woman, but as another person being managed by the same man. I'm 7 months pregnant, Amelia said. Vanessa's hand moved to her mouth. She looked at Daniel. You told me you were separated. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, and Amelia understood that he had lied so many times to so many people, he was no longer capable of keeping track. Eleanor stepped in again, sharp now, losing her polished edge. This is becoming vulgar, Amelia turned to her. You invited her here. Eleanor lifted her chin. I invited the person who belongs in my son's future. The cruelty of it was so clean, so unashamed, that for a moment Amelia felt detached from her own body. There it was. No more hints, no more quiet exclusions, no more polite contempt wrapped in manners, just truth. Eleanor had decided, Daniel had allowed it, and the rest of them had made peace with being witnesses. Amelia felt her daughter move hard inside her, a warning, a protest, a life inside her body saying enough. Daniel's father, Robert, stood suddenly from the table. Eleanor, that's enough. It was the first decent sentence spoken in that room, and it came too late. Eleanor turned toward him with icy disbelief. Sit down. No, Robert said, his voice shaking now with age and shame. Not this time. Daniel looked as though he might finally come apart, but even then, Amelia could see he was still choosing the easiest pain. Not the right thing, just the least disruptive one. That was Daniel's tragedy. He had mistaken avoidance for kindness so long that he no longer knew the difference. Amelia took one step backward, then another. No one stopped her. No one said her name in the way it should have been said. Not with love, not with urgency, not with apology. Daniel moved at last. Amelia, wait. She looked at him, and whatever he saw in her face made him pause. I drove here thinking I was coming to dinner with my husband, she said. I brought your mother a gift. I dressed for a family that had already decided to erase me. Her eyes dropped briefly to his empty hands. You should have at least had the courage to meet me at the door. Then she turned and walked out. She made it to the front hallway before the first tear fell. Only one. She pressed a hand against the wall and forced herself to breathe, not because she was trying to stay composed for them. That part was over. She was trying to stay steady for the baby. Behind her, she heard footsteps. Daniel. Of course, he only followed when the room no longer had to watch him fail. Amelia. She kept facing the wall for a moment, eyes shut. What? She asked. I didn't know my mother was going to do it like this. Amelia let out a soft, disbelieving breath. Do it like what? Bring Vanessa. Put her there. I was going to talk to you. When? Soon. She turned then, and the sight of her face made him flinch. Soon. Men like Daniel always loved that word. Soon I'll explain. Soon I'll fix it. Soon things will make sense. Soon you'll stop asking questions that make me uncomfortable. Amelia rested both hands beneath the curve of her stomach. How long? He looked away. How long? She repeated. Since June. June. Amelia did the math instantly. June was the month she had shown him the positive test with shaking hands and hopeful eyes. June was the month he had held her and whispered, "We're going to be parents." June was the month he had begun lying with a new woman in the background of his life. Amelia stared at him. "You came home from our first appointment," she said slowly, "and then you went to her." Daniel did not answer. That was answer enough, too. She nodded once, as if confirming something to herself. "I kept thinking something felt wrong," she said. "I kept blaming pregnancy, hormones, stress. I kept making myself feel guilty for noticing the truth." He stepped forward. "I never wanted to hurt you." That sentence was so pathetic in its familiarity that Amelia almost pitied him. "You just wanted everything," she said. "Me at home, her in secret, your mother's approval, your reputation intact, your discomfort minimal. Please don't do this right now." "Do what? Say it clearly?" He dragged a hand down his face. "I'm trying to keep this calm." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said the quietest, most devastating thing he would ever hear. "Daniel, you are not calm. You are cowardly." He took that like a slap because it was true. For a second, his expression hardened, not into strength, into defensiveness. "You always make everything emotional." Amelia blinked. Then she laughed once, a small broken sound. "I am 7 months pregnant," she said. "You invited me into an ambush with your mistress and your mother, and I'm the one making things emotional?" His jaw tightened, and in that small, ugly shift, Amelia saw the rest of her future. With him, if she stayed. More blame, more shrinking, more explanations that somehow ended with her apologizing for bleeding when she had been cut. No, something inside her became still, not numb, clear. She reached into her purse, found her car keys, and held them in her hand. "I'm leaving," she said. "Amelia, if you call me later, it will be because you want to feel less guilty, not because you've become a different man in the last 5 minutes." He stared at her. She opened the front door. Cold evening air rushed in. "And Daniel," she said without turning back, "my daughter will never watch me beg for a place at a table that should have been mine." Then she walked to her car and got in. Her hands shook so badly she could barely fit the key into the ignition. The house in front of her glowed warm and grand and full of everything rotten. She sat there with both hands gripping the wheel, breathing too fast. Her phone buzzed, Daniel, then again and again. She threw it into the passenger seat. By the time she made it to the end of the long drive, she was crying so hard she had to pull over beneath a row of bare trees. She pressed her forehead to the steering wheel and let the grief come, not just for the affair, not just for the humiliation, for everything. For the version of her marriage she had worked so hard to preserve, for the child who would now be born into fracture, for the years she had mistaken endurance for love, for the part of herself that had always hoped if she was patient enough, graceful enough, useful enough, she would finally be safe. When the worst of the tears had passed, she reached blindly for her phone. Not Daniel, never Daniel. She scrolled to one name, Lucas Calloway. Her brother answered on the second ring. "Amelia?" That was all it took. Her throat closed again. "Luke," she whispered. His voice changed instantly, became low, direct, dangerous. "Where are you?" She gave him the street name through shaking breaths. "I'm coming," he said. "Do not drive." He got there in 17 minutes. Amelia would remember that later because there are moments in life when time reveals love more clearly than words. Lucas parked behind her and came straight to the driver's side. Tall, dark coat half buttoned, expression hard enough to break stone. He opened her car door, crouched slightly so he was eye level with her, and took one look at her face. What happened? She tried to speak. Nothing came out, so he waited. He had always known how. Finally, she said, "He replaced me." Lucas's jaw flexed. "Start from the beginning." She told him everything, not elegantly, not in order, in gasps and fragments and humiliating pieces. The extra people, the woman at the table, Eleanor, Daniel, the seat in the breakfast room, the lies. June. Lucas did not interrupt once. By the time she finished, his face had gone frighteningly calm. Okay, he said. Amelia gave a weak, disbelieving laugh. Okay? Yes. He reached in and unfastened her seatbelt carefully. Here's what happens next. You are not going back there tonight. You are not answering him tonight. You are not thinking about his mother tonight. You are coming with me. I can't just. Yes, you can. She looked up at him, exhausted and aching and suddenly very young. I brought her a candle, she said. Lucas stared for 1 second, then looked down at the passenger seat where the gift bag sat crumpled. Something in his face softened and shattered all at once. Oh, Amelia! He held out his hand, and she took it. Lucas lived in a high-rise downtown, all quiet glass and understated luxury. But his apartment felt more like home in the first 30 seconds than the Brooks estate ever had. He settled her on the couch with a blanket and a glass of water and then disappeared into the kitchen. Amelia sat staring at the skyline while her phone lit up over and over on the coffee table. Daniel, 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 Eleanor, Daniel again. Lucas came back with tea and turned the phone face down without asking. Drink, he said. She took the cup with both hands. It smelled like chamomile and honey. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Amelia said, Did you know? Lucas did not pretend to misunderstand. No, he said. I knew something was off. I didn't know this. She nodded slowly. I kept feeling crazy, she whispered. Every time I noticed something, he had a reason. Every time I felt hurt, I told myself I was tired, or hormonal, or insecure. I kept editing my own instincts to make him easier to love. Lucas sat across from her, forearms on his knees. That stops tonight. She looked down into the tea. I'm having his baby. You're having your baby, Lucas said. He can decide what kind of father he wants to become later. Right now, we deal with what's real. Amelia breathed that in. For the first time all evening, something in her chest loosened. Not because the pain was smaller, because someone had finally named it correctly. She slept in Lucas's guest room that night, though slept was not quite the word. She drifted in and out of shallow, fractured dreams until just after 4 in the morning, when a sharp pain low in her belly jerked her awake. For one awful second, fear swallowed everything else. She sat up too fast. Another tightening, not severe, not regular, but enough. Luke, she called, voice thin with panic. He was in the room before she finished the second syllable. Within 10 minutes, they were at the hospital. The labor ward was bright and cold and smelled like antiseptic and coffee. Nurses moved quickly. Questions came: blood pressure, timing, hydration, stress, medication, obstetric history. Amelia answered what she could. Lucas handled the rest. It turned out not to be labor. Stress contractions, the doctor called them. Her body reacting to shock. She needed rest, monitoring, and above all, calm. Calm. Amelia almost laughed when the doctor said it. Lucas sat beside her bed in the early morning dimness while machines hummed softly around them. Eventually he said, You don't have to decide everything today. She stared at the ceiling. I know. But you do have to stop protecting people who are hurting you. That landed. Not because it was dramatic, because it was true. Amelia had been protecting Daniel for months, protecting Eleanor for years, protecting the comfort of every room by carrying the discomfort in her own body. No more. By noon, she was discharged with instructions to rest. Lucas took her back to his apartment and, without fanfare, began making calls. A lawyer, a locksmith, a real estate manager, a doctor he trusted for referrals, a moving service on standby. Amelia watched him from the couch, dazed by how efficiently love can move when it's not busy making excuses. Daniel called 31 times that day. She did not answer once. At 3 in the afternoon, he sent a message. Please let me explain before you do something dramatic. Amelia stared at it for a long time. Then she handed the phone to Lucas, who read it, smiled once without humor, and blocked the number. That evening, there was a knock at the apartment door. Lucas looked through the camera monitor first. Of course, he muttered. Eleanor. Amelia sat up straighter on the couch. I don't want to see her. You won't. Lucas opened the docker only as much as necessary. Eleanor stood there in a navy coat, perfectly arranged as if presentation still mattered. I'm here to speak to my sister-in-law. Lucas folded his arms. No, you're not. Eleanor lifted her chin. This situation has become very unfortunate. Lucas's smile was almost polite. Unfortunate is rain on a wedding day. What your family did last night was calculated humiliation of a pregnant woman. Let's use accurate language. Eleanor's face hardened. Amelia is emotional. Daniel was trying to handle a complicated transition. From the couch, Amelia closed her eyes. Transition. As if she were a tenant being removed from a property. Lucas's voice dropped. You should leave before I say something less civil. Eleanor shifted her attention past him, trying to catch sight of Amelia. She should think carefully before turning this into a spectacle. Amelia stood. She was tired, pale, still in borrowed clothes, but something about the quiet in her had changed. Lucas stepped aside slightly, not to expose her, but to let her decide. Amelia walked into view. Eleanor's eyes flickered briefly to her stomach, then back to her face. Amelia, she said, voice instantly softer, rehearsed now for reason. You know how much stress can affect a baby. I think it would be wise to keep private matters private. Amelia looked at her for several seconds. Then she said, You lost the right to advise me about my child when you offered me a separate table while my husband's mistress sat in my chair. Eleanor inhaled sharply. I was trying to avoid a scene. No, Amelia said. You were trying to establish rank. The silence that followed was exquisite. Eleanor did not know how to fight what was spoken plainly. I think, Amelia continued, you have mistaken my courtesy for a weakness for a very long time. Eleanor recovered enough to turn cool again. And I think you are making decisions from a place of hurt. Yes, Amelia said. That's what people usually do after being publicly humiliated. Lucas opened the door wider. Goodbye, Eleanor. She looked from one to the other, perhaps waiting for Amelia to retreat into softness. She didn't. So Eleanor left. The next week unfolded like the slow snapping of an old structure under pressure. Amelia met with a lawyer named Evelyn Hart, who listened without interruption and took notes with the kind of precision that felt like justice in human form. The townhouse Amelia shared with Daniel was jointly owned. The finances were more entangled than Daniel had likely hoped. There were records to review, timelines to establish, protections to put in place before the baby arrived. There were also messages, so many messages, from Daniel, from his sister, from one cousin apologizing weakly, from Robert, his father, who wrote only, I should have stood up sooner. I am sorry, Amelia read that one twice, then she put the phone down. The most unexpected message came 3 days later. Vanessa, I didn't know about the baby. I didn't know he was still fully with you. I'm sorry. I will tell the truth if you need me to. Amelia stared at the text for a long time, then typed back only 3 words. Tell your version. That was enough. Within a day, more pieces surfaced. Daniel had not simply lied to his wife, he had lied to Vanessa too. He had told each woman a different story because that was easier than making one honest decision. That realization did not heal Amelia, but it clarified things. He was not torn. He was not confused. He was not tragically trapped between 2 lives. He was selfish. And selfishness, she was learning, was often just cowardice wearing expensive shoes. 2 weeks after the dinner, Amelia returned to the townhouse with Lucas, Evelyn's assistant, and a moving company. Daniel was there. Of course he was. He stood in the entry hall like a man who had spent 14 days being forced to look at himself and hated every second of it. Amelia, she kept walking. He moved in front of her. Please. Lucas stepped between them with such ease it was almost elegant. She's here for her things. Daniel looked at Lucas, then back at Amelia. Can we talk alone? No. His face tightened. You're really doing this. That sentence, more than any apology he had attempted, convinced Amelia she was done, as if she were the one escalating, as if betrayal was passive until the betrayed person made it inconvenient. She met his eyes. I was already doing this, she said. I was doing it when I showed up to dinner as your wife. You changed the arrangement. I'm just responding to reality. He looked suddenly tired. I made a mistake. No, Amelia said quietly. You made a series of choices and then invited witnesses. The movers went upstairs. Daniel's gaze dropped briefly to her stomach. How is she? Amelia almost answered. Instinct is slow to relearn itself. Then she stopped. She's fine. He nodded like he had been granted something. When the nursery door opened upstairs and the men began carefully removing boxes, Daniel's composure finally cracked. You're taking everything? Amelia looked at him, genuinely surprised by the question. Yes. He rubbed a hand over his mouth. I thought maybe after some time. No. That word stayed in the hallway between them like a locked gate. No, not maybe, not later, not after he explained, not after his mother softened, not after the baby came, not after enough time had passed for the humiliation to become bearable in memory. No. He looked at her then the way people do when they finally realize the version of you they depended on is gone. I do love you, he said. Amelia felt something like pity rise and then pass. No, she said. You loved my willingness to absorb damage quietly. He had no answer to that. By evening, the townhouse was half empty. By night, Amelia was back in Lucas's apartment, with the only things that mattered. Clothes, documents, the nursery chair her mother had bought before she died, and the small framed watercolor of a lake she had once loved before marriage taught her to decorate for other people. 3 weeks later, Amelia signed a lease on an apartment in Lucas's building, 3 floors below him. It had tall windows, pale walls, and a second bedroom that caught morning light. The day she got the keys, she stood in the middle of the empty living room with one hand on her belly and let herself cry. Not because she was broken, because she was free enough to feel it now. She painted the nursery soft cream. She bought a narrow bookshelf. She folded tiny clothes into drawers with a care that felt almost sacred. Lucas built the crib with terrible patience and only swore twice. Amelia laughed both times. That laughter sounded new. Or maybe old. Maybe it was simply the sound of herself returning. When her daughter was born on a cold December morning, just after 6, the first thing Amelia felt was terror and then pain, and then a love so absolute it made every other emotion rearrange itself around it. When the nurse placed the baby against her chest, pink and furious and perfect, Amelia whispered, Hello, Clara. Clara, bright, clear, unmistakable. Lucas stood near the bed with tears he pretended not to have. Robert came later, quietly, with flowers and an apology that asked for nothing in return. Daniel came too, hours after the birth, uncertain at the doorway, like a man entering a life he no longer understood how to occupy. Amelia let him see his daughter. Because Clara was not a bargaining tool, she was a person, and Amelia had decided that whatever Daniel failed at with her, she would not let him drag their daughter into the same theater of ego and silence. He stood over the hospital bassinet staring down at Clara, and for a moment he looked stripped of every performance, just a man face to face with something innocent enough to reveal his own poverty of character. She's beautiful, he whispered. Amelia looked at her daughter's small face, then out the window at the winter sky beginning to pale with morning. Yes, she said, she is. Months later, people still talked about the dinner in whispers, about Eleanor, about Vanessa, about the separate table, about the nerve of it, about the humiliation, about Lucas Calloway, who, according to one cousin, had looked at the Brooks family as if calculating the cost of every lie in the room. But Amelia no longer lived in that house of whispers. Her apartment smelled like baby lotion, coffee, clean laundry, and the faint sweetness of the peonies Lucas sent every other Friday, because he said every mother deserved flowers that were not attached to an apology. Clara learned to smile, then to laugh, then to reach, and with every ordinary miracle, Amelia's life became less about what had been taken from her and more about what she was building without permission. Some nights were still hard. There were legal meetings, co parenting schedules, unexpected bills, sudden grief, the occasional memory that came back so vividly she could still feel the cold weight of that front hallway in her bones. But those nights passed, and on the other side of them was a life no longer arranged around someone else's comfort. One spring evening, when Clara was 4 months old, Amelia sat by the nursery window with her sleeping against her chest and thought about the woman who had driven to dinner in a green dress, carrying a candle and hope. She did not hate that woman. She loved her, actually, loved her for trying, loved her for surviving, loved her for finally leaving. Because dignity, she had learned, does not arrive when other people decide to treat you well. It begins the moment you stop asking them to. And if there was one lesson Amelia would one day teach her daughter, it would be this: never beg to be chosen in a room that requires your humiliation. Leave, build your own table, and when love comes, if it comes, let it arrive with honesty, with courage, and with a chair that is already yours.